Meta has rolled out its new teen account settings in response to public concerns about online safety for minors. So what are the new teen account settings? Has social media aggravated crime rates? And how severe is social media addiction among minors? Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we address efforts to ensure protection of minors on social media platforms. For this, I have Professor Cho Hee-kyung at Hongik University live on the line. Professor Cho, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I also have Kwon Soa with us. Soa, it's good to have you here.
Hello, Sunny. Always happy to be here.
Right, so we'll start here in the studio then. Let's begin with details about Instagram's new teen account settings then.
Well, one of the most popular social media platforms in the world, Instagram, is putting its efforts in making its service a safer place for children and teenagers amid growing worries by parents that there are potential threats regarding these platforms that are posed to their children. Now, last week, Instagram's company Meta made this announcement public under the title, Introducing Instagram Teen Accounts, Built-in Protections for Teens, Peace of Mind for Parent. The strongest ever limitations have been introduced with the launch of a new teen accounts feature. The biggest change for young Instagram users will be that their accounts will all be turned into private accounts so that strangers cannot freely access their feed. Also, inappropriate content such as sexual and violent content will be restricted from being recommended through algorithms. In order to prevent youngsters from staying too long on their social media, a 60-minute notification will tell them to quit their activities on the app. Time limits can also be set manually by parents, as the new system offers parents much more control over their kids' usage of Instagram. By connecting to their child's account, they can set the total limit for the day, disable the app during certain times, and they can even see who they have been chatting with over the past week. Before, similar features were only able if the child gave permission to their parents, and now these features will be automatically accessed by parents. According to Meta, teen accounts will be placed within 60 days in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Those who create a new account already are subject to the changes. The accounts are planned to be introduced in the European Union later this year and elsewhere around the world starting in January next year, which means including Korea.
Right, and all these efforts to ensure that the social media platform is safer for children. That being said, Professor Cho, what has been the role of social media in fueling crime?
Well, it's difficult to say if there's any evidence that directly links usage of social media to increased crime. It's a little bit like saying, because there's a lot more violence on television and in the cinema, it led to increase in violence, but there's actually no evidence of that. But what we do have evidence on, fairly irrefutable evidence, is the negative effect of social media on mental health, particularly of teenagers. Our brains continue to develop until well into our mid-20s. I really wish I had known that fact when I was a teenager. And particularly our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of brain just behind your forehead, that's the part that essentially controls decision-making, prioritizing, planning, all these, rational, thought process that you have to carry out. And that's one of the last parts to develop in our brain. And so in teens, those functions are still very much in the process of developing. And so negative social experiences that we have as teens really negatively impact directly on our brain development. And so if teens become addicted to social media, which is very easy to do, and also become subjected to possibly cyberbullying and perhaps get inveigled into wrong type of content on social media, things like, pro-Anna movement that was really big a few years ago, things that sort of promote the kind of, sort of distorted body image, so body dysmorphia, those kind of things can really have a very negative impact on their development overall, and especially their mental development, which is going to have an impact lifelong and not just in their teenage years.
Right. And before we delve further into the risks of social media, so for the sake of greater perspective, what can you tell us about the Korean public's interaction with social media?
Well, first off, I want to know your interaction on social media. Which app, Sunny, do you use most frequently on your smartphone?
And we addressed this before the start of the program. As I mentioned, I only use KakaoTalk. That's the only app that I use. I have very little digital footprint, if I may.
Actually, I know, because we used to talk about these social media platforms. And I have to say that you and I both have different preferences from the majority. So let's take a look at the clear winner when it comes to applications Koreans favor or use most frequently. It's YouTube. And that goes for all age groups. Let's take a look at a survey conducted by Wise App Retail and Goods, which analyzed the average usage of apps here in Korea in the month of August. So here we see the younger generation of smartphone users, from those under the age of 20 to their 30s, all spent the biggest time on video platform YouTube. Those in their 20s spent close to 28 billion hours on the app. Instagram and Korea's messenger KakaoTalk came in second or third in these three age groups. But when you look at the gap between Instagram and KakaoTalk, it's pretty big in the youngest age group. That's attributed to this group using the DM feature on Instagram for messaging more than others, which again is another reason for why Instagram's new restrictions make sense to parents, because you can DM strangers, but when you use KakaoTalk, you usually message people that you know in real life. Now let's go to the 40s to above 60s. Again, YouTube, the clear #1 platform, followed by KakaoTalk and Korea's #1 search engine Naver in third in all three groups. What's interesting is that TikTok, or its lighter version TikTok Lite, is in the top 10 in all age groups, showing a rising interest in short-form contents even among elderly. Different from the younger generations, there are no game platforms on the list, but instead e-commerce and flea market platforms Coupang and 당근 Market are there. Now, in total, YouTube was watched for 117.4 billion minutes, that meaning one person watched an average of 73 minutes of YouTube videos per day. And another interesting factor is that Instagram has surpassed Naver in usage. So short-form platforms really seem to be the keyword here in Korea, as they are trending after they emerged on platforms like YouTube and Instagram.
Right, so based on the figures you've shared with us, a very active interaction between the public here and social media. Now, so as Professor Cho mentioned earlier, social media addiction among minors, it's also a universal concern, right?
It is. And with more people in the world owning a cell phone than a toilet, that is a fact according to studies. Smartphone addiction and social media addiction is a global growing concern. And with the mobile device owners or users getting younger and younger, and the time underage glued to their phones is getting longer and longer, countries around the world have been addressing the concerns of social media addiction among youngsters. According to findings from the University of Michigan, that estimates 210 million people in the world are addicted to social media and the internet, researchers indicate that the younger generation is more vulnerable to addiction and more susceptible to negative impacts such as depression, anxiety, and even suicidal thoughts. Now, here in Korea, a survey by the Ministry of Science and ICT and the National Information Society Agency last year said around 40% of teenagers aged 10 to 19 are at risk of smartphone overdependence. And even 1 out of 4 children aged 3 to 9 fell into the same risk category. The study also showed that while 23% of respondents to the survey who viewed short-form content said they feel difficulty in controlling their viewing habits, the percentage was at 37% among teens. Now, in the US, around 4 in 5 adults are concerned about the time kids spend on social media. custodial and internet safety solution provider, says TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat are the most frequently blocked apps globally as parents address their worries by blocking these apps. Children spend an average of 50 minutes a day to check their social media feeds. Common Sense Media, an organization that reviews and provides media and technology ratings, found American adolescents' screen time was 7 hours, 22 minutes a day. For kids 8 to 12, 4 hours and 44 minutes. That's for kids from 8 to 12, the age that I meant. And in the UK, almost half of teenagers themselves said they felt addicted to social media, based on findings by the Millennium Cohort, with 57% of girls feeling that way compared to 37% of boys. Speaking of which, a UNESCO report earlier this year warned social media affects the well-being of girls, their learning and career choices. A 2022 study at Canada's McGill University referred to the COVID-19 pandemic having made things more severe, with China, Malaysia, and Saudi Arabia having the highest number of problematic smartphone use among 24 countries they studied. And also acknowledging this issue, China's state-run newspaper Global Times also referred to some 21% of left-behind children suffering severely from smartphone addiction.
Right. And Professor Cho, keeping in mind the grim data shared by SOA, what can you tell us about the broader efforts perhaps to better protect minors than online?
Well, obviously, parents around the world are very concerned about their children's smartphone usage and addiction to social media, and governments are starting to take action. So, for example, in France, they have introduced a law since June last year, which essentially limits access by children under 15 years to social media. Italy has actually gone further. They actually prohibit children under 14 from owning a phone and limit or restrict access to social media until the age of 16. So after 14, you can own a phone, but you shouldn't access social media with it. There are also other countries that are looking to introduce similar laws which restrict or limit or even prohibit access to social media. And Australia is one of them. United Kingdom is considering introducing a bill. Florida, in the state of Florida in the US, and I believe around 28 other states are debating similar bills. And here in Korea also, we have currently before our National Assembly 2 bills related to restricting access to teens, so minors, to social media. But the problem is it's very well to introduce these kinds of laws, but how are you going to enforce it? Because we talked about age limits and restricting access to people under a certain age, but it's not like television where there is one set in the house and parents can actually see if children are before it or not. If the child has a mobile phone on their person, how are you actually going to limit it? We have had experience here in Korea with restricting access to online games after midnight until 6 a.m. Some years ago, and that was a spectacular failure, essentially, which partially led to clamoring of shutting down Ministry of.
Oh, I'm afraid we've had a slight problem there with our connection with Professor Cho, and while we wait for our connection with her, so perhaps you could tell us a bit more about Korea's efforts to ease concerns over minor protection online.
Well, Sunny, with some experts believing that Korea may actually have the highest level of smartphone addiction among teenagers in the world, based on the figures I earlier mentioned, 1 out of 4 teens at risk of smartphone overdependence, there have been voices calling for urgent need for laws to tackle this problem and prevent psychological, physical, and social problems that could stem from the social media addiction. Now, also, as Professor Cho touched upon, recently 5 bills have been introduced at Parliament to combat these negative social media effects in the past 3 months. They include a provision to set a daily limit of social media usage for those under the age of 16, one that calls on the permission of subscribing to social media platforms from the age of 14 and not younger, disclosure, as well as a requirement for parents and children's consent before using information that involve algorithmic recommendations. The government also got together with those providing digital platforms and services, including Naver, Kakao, SK Telecom, Google Korea, and Meta Korea earlier this year to discuss ways to reduce the adverse impacts of social media on underage, including preventive education and the responsibility of companies to create a healthy digital environment. Companies on this occasion also introduced policies they are voluntarily promoting for the healthy use of social media and smartphones by young people.
Right. And Professor Cho, speaking as a scholar in the field of law, do you believe such legal efforts to better protect our minors online perhaps run the risk of violating their basic rights?
Indeed. We can think about the minors' right to free speech, for example, and freedom to receive information. And if you ban their access to social media completely, how do you do that? How do you actually guarantee those rights? You looked at, favorite social media in Korea earlier, and I have to count myself as one of the average people because the app that I use the most is actually YouTube, and I not only get my news from YouTube, but I use it for all sorts of useful content that I can actually turn to for my lectures. If I need to learn something new about how to do something, YouTube is the first source that I go to. So there are actually a lot of useful and beneficial content that are available on social media. And if teenagers are prohibited from accessing even those, you may be breaching some of their fundamental rights, including right to information, right to education, right to communication, etc.
Right. And so moving forward, what are the prospects of other social media platforms following Instagram's footsteps?
Well, they are likely to follow suit in some way or another. And Meta, the company that owns and operates not only Instagram, but also big platforms like Facebook, Threads, and WhatsApp, said in its recent announcement regarding the Instagram teen accounts that it's planning to bring teen accounts to other Meta platforms next year. An extract of its statement said, "These are big updates that will change the Instagram experience for millions of teens, and we need to make sure they work correctly," suggesting that if everything works correctly, the company will apply its features to other applications as well. With the huge change at Instagram, there is already attention being drawn to whether social media platforms like YouTube, which boasts some 2.7 billion users as of September this year, will come up with similar measures for teens. YouTube, like Meta, is involved in legal battles with the U.S. government over teen addiction. In February, New York City sued 5 social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and YouTube, demanding to take steps to combat youth social media addiction. It's not that they all have no protection measures at all in place. For instance, YouTube has its Kids YouTube version, and Snapchat already has a function that allows parents to see who their child is messaging. YouTube, meanwhile, recently announced it aims to limit recommendations of certain health and fitness contents to teenagers in a bid to prevent idealizations of certain body types.
Right, which was something that Professor Cho mentioned earlier, right? And Professor Cho, broadly speaking, what are your suggestions to better address the unfavorable social repercussions triggered by social media platforms?
I think the parents need to actually look at their own behavior and conduct with regard to social media. I know plenty of parents who are actually, although they won't admit it to themselves, addicted to their phones. And in fact, in Berlin, primary school children have staged a demonstration, essentially, demanding that parents put down their phones and spend more time with them. And so, obviously, it's important to protect our children and ensure that teens are protected to the extent that we can from the negative impact of social media. But children learn from the behavior of their parents. And if parents are spending so much time on their phone and on social media, then what will children learn? So that's one thing. The second thing is, there is stricter and greater regulation required for the social media platforms. Just restricting access or time limits for the users of the social media are not really going to deal with the tech addiction that people are suffering from, because once you fall into that internet rabbit hole, it's very difficult to dig yourself out of it. And companies actually do a lot of research into developing the kind of algorithms that keep people on their platform for as long as they can. And so I think greater transparency and greater regulation of the media companies is also an important issue.
Right, of course. All right, Professor Cho, as always, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
And Soa here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Anytime, Sunny.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching.